Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The Alpha's Scarlet Secret. Episode 8. Chapter 63. Scarlet entered the hall. Her heart was thundering so loudly she wondered if everyone could hear it. Angela suddenly froze, gripping Scarlet's hand tightly. "My mate," she said. Scarlet's eyes widened looking at Angela, who was scanning the crowds. A tall slender woman with blonde hair in an elegant updo and deep blue eyes stepped towards them, dressed in a deep pink-colored gown, her eyes widening as she looked at Angela. "Mate," she said softly, her eyes flashing when she saw the girl's intertwined hands. "Mine," she growled, making Scarlet pull free and raise her hand in surrender. She was shocked to say the least. Angela had a female mate. She never knew Angela was bi. She looked at her friend, who looked shocked too, staring at the woman who now stopped in front of her. "Hi, I'm Cassandra," she said, holding her hand out. Angela just stood there stunned. The woman before her was beautiful, but she was not expecting a woman. Angela," Angela said, confused. Sure, she had a few crushes on women over the years but never thought much of it. She appreciated a hot woman when she saw one, and the one before her was indeed ravishing. She let her eyes dip lower, taking in the woman's curves, feeling her stomach knot, and quickly looked back into her eyes. The woman smiled seeing this, and Angela quickly took her hand, gasping when she felt the sparks. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman," Cassandra said. Leaning forward, she kissed Angela's cheek as Scarlet simply stood there too shocked to speak. Angela now looked at Scarlet, confused with the emotions that went through her and the feelings that swirled in her chest. "I'm Scarlet, Angela's best friend," Scarlet said, trying to help her friend out. Cassandra seemed to relax a little at this, still holding Angela's hand. "Nice to meet you. Mind if I steal my mate?" she said. Scarlet shook her head, not missing the conflict in Angela's eyes. She felt a little concerned for her friend. Someone who had never ever mentioned her interest in women before was now blessed with a female mate. She watched the two women walk off and hoped Angela found happiness with her mate. "Now that, I wasn't expecting." Liam's voice came from behind her. Scarlet turned, not missing the disappointment in his eyes. He looked her over. She wasn't his mate. The moment he had seen her across the room, it had hurt, but he wasn't sure how to feel about it. Relieved that she would not need to reject him? Or sad that he had no chance? Smiling softly, he looked into her soft green eyes. "You look beautiful, by the way." "Thanks, you look good too," Scarlet said, her nerves playing up, realizing Elijah must be nearby. Liam looked at her, understanding what she was thinking about. "He headed outside," he said, motioning with his head at the open doors on the far side of the hall. "Thanks," Scarlet said, giving him a small smile, trying to calm her nerves as she made her way through the crowds of people. So many scents filled her nose, but nothing stood out. With each step she took, her heart thundered louder, pausing when she saw the open doors, her chest rising and falling as she slowly made her way closer. There he stood in his perfectly fitted black suit, his back to her, his hands braced on the rail. But it was the surge of emotions that coursed through her when she looked at him that made her stop in her tracks. A dangerously intoxicating scent enveloping her. It was completely new. Never had she smelt something so good. She took a deep breath, noticing Elijah's normal scent was mixed under the overwhelmingly tempting scent that now came from him, making one thing crystal clear. He was her mate. She placed a hand to her chest as if trying to calm the emotions that swirled in her chest. Happiness, disbelief, and relief. The moon goddess hadn't let her down. She had granted her the greatest blessing she could ever hope for. She was brought out of her thoughts when he spoke. I, Elijah Westwood, future alpha of the Blood Moon Pack, reject you as my mate, and you don't say it. She said breathlessly, her heart racing as she looked at him. Elijah froze. That voice. His heart raced as he slowly turned to look at the woman who had spoken. There she stood, looking like a goddess, her glittering dress accentuating every curve of her divine body. Her vibrant locks were pulled back and her large green eyes glistened as they looked at him with shock clear in them. Red, he said, his voice hoarse. He could feel the bond sizzling between them, the pull to take her in his arms and kiss her driving him nuts. No matter how much he wanted to hold her, he was too stunned to move. She was his and he was hers. Even the goddess had fated them to be. Scarlet stepped forward, closing the gap between them, her eyes locked with his blue ones, feeling her wolf going crazy in her mind. She was a mere 2 feet away when Elijah seemed to come back to reality and closed the gap between them. He pulled her into his arms tightly, burying his nose in the crook of her neck. She gasped, feeling the strong sparks jolt through her, sending pleasure to her. If she had thought he had an effect on her before, what she was experiencing now was more than anything she could have ever imagined. You're mine, you're mine, Elijah said, his strong arms tightening around her. He kissed her neck, the urge to mark her taking over, and he pulled away, looking into her eyes for a split second before his lips crashed against hers. Scarlet's eyes fluttered shut as the wave of emotions and sensations hit her strongly. He kissed her with everything he had. She could barely keep up with him as he devoured her with that kiss. He had kissed her many times, but there was something about this one that would forever burn in her mind. He kissed her with passion, yet at the same time as if she was a glass doll that may break if he was too rough. She could feel the strong pull of his emotions through the bond, enveloping her like a blanket. He broke away when she needed air, both breathing heavily as he pressed his forehead to hers. She could feel him shaking just as much as she was. I'm yours, Scarlet said softly, opening her eyes, very aware of every inch of his body that was touching hers. His hand on her waist held her tightly, the other on her upper bare back, her skin tingling under his fingertips. Now and forever, he said, looking into her eyes. A huge burden that had been weighing down on him had been lifted and he felt light and free. You look so beautiful, I don't think any words could ever be enough to describe how perfect you are. Your eyes say enough, you look incredibly yourself, she said, leaning closer and kissing his lips softly. His hand ran down her back, making her breath hitch, pressing her together. He growled, the dangerous scent of her arousal hitting his nose. Don't make me take you right here, he said, squeezing her as he pressed her against the hard-on that he was now supporting. She smirked. As much as that sounds tempting, I'd rather we don't have an audience, she said, amused, her hand running down his chest and abs. Kitten, he said, throbbing, wanting her touch despite the fact they were in a semi-private area. Sure no one will realize, she said, biting her lips, looking up at him seductively as she made swift work of his belt. Slipping her hand into his pants, she stepped forward, backing him against the railing. Taking a moment to scan the gardens, there was a few couples, some walking, some making out and one on the bench who seemed to be doing a lot more. She smiled teasingly up at him. "Scarlet," he said, biting back a groan as her hand pushed his boxers aside. "Elijah," she said in an equally breathless voice, her free hand wrapping around his manhood. "You're a vixen, Red," he said, squeezing her. He could feel her perfect cheeks under the silk gown and couldn't wait to strip it off her body, making pleasure rush through him. "I think I have you totally at my mercy, handsome." Her heart thumped as she fought the urge, feeling him tense, knowing if anyone looked out, they would get caught if observed long enough. "That's it, sweetheart," he groaned, feeling himself nearing. Pleasure consumed him, tipping him towards the edge. Scarlet felt him nearing. "That's it, baby, let go," she whispered, his breathless groans driving her crazy and the urge to mark him took over. Blushing when she saw a few couples watching them curiously, she turned away, not caring, as she raised her hand to her mouth. "You taste delicious," she said softly, looking into his eyes as he buckled his belt. "That was hot," he said, unable to find the words. He didn't know what it was, but seeing her taking control at times, to do whatever she wants, was amazing and an incredible turn-on. She smiled slightly as he took out his pocket square, passing it to her. She blushed lightly, wiping her hand clean on it. "I'm glad you liked it," she said, her heart thudding, realizing she had marked him. "I'm sorry I marked you without," he cut her off, not letting her finish her sentence, kissing her passionately. He moved back after a moment and looked into her eyes. "Don't ever apologize for claiming a right that belonged to you." A soft smile crossed her lips and she locked her arms around his neck, her heart filled with so much warmth. Who said life couldn't be perfect? Their eyes met, lost in a world that only contained the two of them. Scarlet took a deep breath, wanting to say the three words she had been tempted to say for a while now, and this time she wouldn't hold back. "I love you, Elijah, so much." Elijah's heart skipped a beat, those words resonating in his head. She loved him. He cupped her face. Leaning down, he kissed her so tenderly it made her breath catch in her throat. Never had his lips moved so gently against hers. No desire was fueling it. It was an innocent yet loving kiss full of passion and emotion. She kissed him back until an annoying nasally voice interrupted them. "Oh my God, yuck! What are you two doing?" Scarlet moved back as she looked at Kiera standing there with a very bulky werewolf who towered over her, his eyes full of admiration as he watched her. "We're mates," Elijah said. "Although even if she wasn't, I'd still make her mine." It took Kiera a moment to realize what he said. Gasping, she stared at them. "You two were?" "That's none of your business, Kiera. So why don't you and your lovely mate move along?" Scarlet said. The man now blinked and gave a sheepish smile. "Sorry, I'm Drake." "Nice to meet you, Alpha Elijah, Luna," he trailed off, not knowing Scarlet's name. "Scarlet," she offered. It still felt surreal. "You marked him?" Kiera shrieked, now running over to them to stare at Elijah's neck, a look of pure jealousy crossing her face. Scarlet turned to Elijah's neck, her heart skipping a beat to see the wound had healed up. In its place was a tattoo of a wolf with its head raised up. The mark itself looked like it was shimmering a dark grey. Her wolf, her mark. She traced her finger over it, sending a shiver of pleasure through him. "It looks good on you," she said. "Oh yeah? Can't wait to mark you too," he said, pulling her close, not caring that Kiera was standing there looking furious. He kissed Scarlet's neck as Kiera grabbed Drake's hand and led him away. "Poor guy." "I know," Scarlet said, wincing. "Shall we go dance?" "Sure, I want to flaunt my mate off," he said, kissing her hand before leading her inside. Scarlet looked around, wondering if anyone else had found their mates. "Angela found her mate," she said to Elijah as they began swaying on the dance floor, her arms loosely around his neck. His hair that had been styled perfectly now looked rather messy from their little play from earlier, although he still looked dangerously. "Great, any idea who he is?" he asked. Her name's Cassandra," Scarlet said. Elijah's eyes widened in surprise. "Wait, what? I never knew she's wait, have you two ever what?" "No. I don't think she even knew." She looked shocked. "Besides, she's my best friend, what goes through that mind of yours?" Scarlet scolded. Elijah frowned. "But she's seen you right," he said. Scarlet raised an eyebrow. "Seriously? Are you jealous right now, Elijah?" she said, frowning despite wanting to smile at the pout that was on his face. He looked almost adorable, as if someone had robbed him of something precious. He'll eat his lips, showing off his pierced tongue for a moment and sighed. "Okay, fine, I'll try not to get jealous. Yeah, you better not," Scarlet said as Elijah spun her out and pressed her against himself. "Do you blame me, kitten? When I have the one woman on the planet in my arms, of course I'm going to be protective," he said, kissing her neck softly, his touch soothing the burning stinging that lingered beneath the foundation. Now that they were going to face her father together, he could mark her right? He wanted to ask her but didn't want to ruin their moment, so instead he spun her around before dancing with her once more. It was a good half an hour later, with plenty of teasing and grinding on the dance floor. Elijah was ready to get out of there, but Scarlet was too busy eating. He didn't complain. Just watching her was enough, and he wanted her to have plenty of energy for tonight because the night sure was going to be long. "Scarlet." Both turned to see Angela walking over to them, alone. Scarlet frowned. "Where's Cassandra?" Angela looked at Elijah before looking away. "We exchanged numbers. I told her I'll get to know her. I thought I'll come to tell you I'm leaving. I had your phone so couldn't call. Are you two mates?" she asked, clearly not wanting to talk about her own mate. Elijah smirked, pulling his collar down proudly. "Wow, you didn't waste any time, Scarlet," she said with a small smile. Neither missed the flicker of sadness in her eyes. Scarlet walked over to her, placing her plate down. "Give her a chance, Angela, you never know what this might lead to," she said softly to her friend. Angela simply nodded before she left the hall. "So, shall we call it a night?" Elijah asked, pulling Scarlet close as he kissed her lips softly. Scarlet looked up into his eyes, nodding, her heart racing. He held her around her waist as he led her out of the room. They barely made it through the door of Elijah's hotel suite, already undressing one another. Elijah lifted her up, making her eyes widen. "Elijah," she said. Let me at least carry you to the bed, kitten," he said. Scarlet now looked around, her breath hitching when she saw the candles that were arranged around the room, the flower petals that littered the floor and were scattered around the table. She saw the huge bouquet of red roses that sat on the table next to the bed and a tray containing wine and a platter of chocolates. She looked back at him. "You did this for me," she said. "Obviously, it definitely wasn't for me," he said, placing her on the bed. Her heart skipped a beat as she rolled her eyes, admiring the romantic setting around her. "Thank you," she said softly, tugging him close. He reached for the chocolates. Taking a piece, he placed it to her lips as her head touched the pillows. Leaning over, he kissed her, taking half the chocolate from her lips before their lips met in a passionate yet tender kiss, the sweetness of the other mouth mixed with the rich taste of hazelnut chocolate. Her heart was a storm of emotions. His touch was softer, although he was as passionate as ever. There was something tender there. There was something different about his touch, and it made her lose all rational thought. The feeling of loving someone, desiring them, and being made for them was more than anything he could have managed. Right now, this was heaven, a heaven he never wanted to leave. "Mark me, Elijah, please." Her breathless voice coated with desire and love. Elijah sat up, pulling her close. He didn't need to be told twice, his wolf was already fighting to come out. He held her trembling body close, as both felt the bond complete. "I love you, kitten," he said through the mind link that now was formed between the couple. She picked her head up, looking into his eyes before she hugged him tightly. "I love you too," she said, sounding relieved, glad the link was restored. It had been far too long. The painful stinging that had accompanied her for so long was now gone, replaced by a cooling sensation. She could feel his emotions and he could feel hers. Her heart thundered, feeling how much love he felt for her, the fear that she would leave him, the way she made him feel. "Wow," she whispered, never had she realized how much she meant to him. No matter how much he said it, feeling it was so much more. "Yeah, that was incredible," he said, smirking. "We both know I don't need to say how good that was, considering I was screaming," she said. "Your emotions, we need to work on our blocks," he murmured. "But for now I want you to know how much you mean to me." Their eyes met. She could sense his emotion and thoughts, her heart hammered. He didn't need to say it for her to know what he was thinking. She ran a finger down his chest, her eyes not leaving his. "If you want it, say it," she said. "I want you, May 1. He asked arrogantly. "I'm yours to play with however you want, handsome," she replied. "God, you're perfect in every way," he said. She smiled. "As are you," she said. He brushed her hair aside, his eyes going to the mark upon her neck. A smirk on his lips, seeing the shimmering midnight blue tattoo, a moon with a wolf looking up towards it. "I look good on you," he said quietly. She smiled, snuggling against his chest, feeling sleep overcome her. A content smile was on his lips as he gazed at his beautiful queen that was now snuggled on top of him. He noticed the marks she had left on him were fading away. It seemed since their bond was complete she couldn't do much damage to him anymore. The thought amused him. He actually liked having her leave some proof of their love-making on him. He kissed her forehead. No matter what, he would keep her safe. Now and forever. Please Papa. Please don't. A child's voice shrieked in horror. Elijah frowned. What was this? He looked around. He was in some sort of room, a garage. There were tools and weapons around the side and a table with dry blood stains in the middle. His attention fell to the man he recognized, who was smashing a child's head into the floor repeatedly. Anger blazed through him as he ran over, making to grab the man only for his hand to go right through him. He tried again, but it was futile. Was this a dream? Looking at the child who was covered in so much blood, her tiny hands clawing at the monster's wrist. Elijah backed away, his heart thudding, realization hitting him hard. This was not a nightmare, it was a memory. Scarlet's memory. He watched helplessly as Zidane dragged her by the hair across the room, picking up a large jug of liquid and stepping back flung it over the little girl. Her screams pierced Elijah's heart, the color draining from his face as he ran to her side, feeling his eyes sting with desperation. Wolfsbane burned her skin as she writhed on the floor. He tried to grab her, but his hand simply went through her. He growled, looking at the man who was watching the child, his head tilted to the side with a manic glint in his eyes as he watched the wolfsbane burn her. After a few moments of watching, he turned and left the room, leaving the child on the floor. Elijah watched her, wishing he could give her some sort of support as she writhed in agony before him. The pain in his chest was too much. Why hadn't he been there for her? Why did she have to go through this? I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, he whispered to the child who could not hear him as she writhed and whimpered on that cold hard floor. Elijah! Elijah! His eyes flew open, his heart thudding in his chest, looking at Scarlet in the dim light of the first rays of dawn that peeked through the crack in the curtains. He looked her over, bolting upright, his hands running down her arms. She was okay. She was. Here. Concern flooded her face as she cupped his face. Elijah, are you okay? She asked, sensing his fear, anger, and pain. He didn't reply, pulling her into his arms tightly. She didn't speak, too confused to say anything. His racing heart scared her. How did you survive it all? His voice was barely above a hoarse whisper. Scarlet froze, realizing what happened. She had been having a nightmare. She had learned to become immune to them. Guilt twisted in her stomach. She had marked him and now he had to see all that. It was something she hadn't wanted anyone to ever know the extent of. He stroked her hair, moving her back so he could see her face. Hey, don't think like that, and don't you ever feel guilty. Elijah growled. He is going to die and I swear I'm going to put him. She didn't say anything, unable to think what she could possibly say that would comfort him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and he slowly lay back, taking a deep breath. I'm sorry. She whispered. He kissed the top of her head, rolling on his side and pulling her completely against him. Like I said, don't ever apologize. He said, placing another kiss on her cheek. She had nothing to apologize for. Inhaling her scent that now held a little of his, he tried to calm his raging emotions. Go to sleep, sweetheart. She nodded, resting her head against his chest, his arm underneath her head, and closed her eyes. Wishing she could somehow block those horrible memories from him. It wasn't the worst memory, there was so many that were 100 times worse. She didn't sleep, letting him fall asleep first, scared that another nightmare might disturb him, so she stayed awake despite how tired she felt. And only when his phone rang in the morning and Elijah woke up did Scarlet let herself catch a quick nap, telling him to shower first, promising herself she wouldn't let him carry her burden for her. It was much later and they were about to head back. A lot of their pack members had found mates and Elijah was organizing exactly who was returning and who was going straight to their mates' packs. The only female not to go with her mate was Angela. Liam and Fiona had not found their mates. The other wolves had been shocked to find out Scarlet and Elijah were mated, and some had been even more surprised they didn't reject each other. Scarlet walked over to Angela, who seemed lost in thought. "Hey, you okay?" Scarlet said to her. A smile crossed her face, but Scarlet knew her better than that. "Of course I am," she said, tossing her hair. She looked at Scarlet's neck, seeing her mark, and a genuine smile crossed her face. "That mark is gorgeous." "Thanks. It feels good to have that horrible mark gone," Scarlet said, running her finger along her mark. A soft smile crossed her lips and her stomach fluttered, remembering hers and Elijah's night. "I'm happy for the both of you," Angela said. Scarlet gave her a gentle smile. "Cassandra seemed like a nice lady," she said quietly. Guess so," Angela said. "I don't know. Anyway, enough about me." Scarlet didn't push it, knowing she didn't want to discuss it. Just then Elijah came over, wrapping his arms around Scarlet's waist from behind and kissed her neck. "I want Angela to come with us," Scarlet said through the link. "Sure, sweetheart," Elijah replied, glancing up at Angela. "I'll get Liam to join us, you should too. Really, like you don't mind me tagging along, considering you two might want to be alone," Angela said. Elijah looked at her, his head now resting on top of Scarlet's head. "I can share, now that I know she's mine forever," he said, making Scarlet smile slightly, knowing he was doing it for her. "Okay, great," Angela said. Elijah looked over at Liam, who was about to get into one of the other cars. "Join us, since we've got a third wheel anyway," he said through the mind link. He felt a little bad that he hadn't found his mate. Liam looked at him, seeing how happy Scarlet looked in his arms, feeling a pang of sadness, but he simply nodded, grabbing his bag and made his way over to them. They all got into Elijah's car, with Liam and Angela in the back. "I wonder how your mum and dad will be," Angela said once they were out of London and on the motorway. "Too bad, we're mates. I want to see exactly what he does now," Elijah said, his eyes flashing. "Elijah, let's try sorting stuff out," Scarlet said. "Does anyone know you two are mates?" Liam asked. "Back home? Yeah, Kira announced it to the world, so I'm guessing everyone knows," and Indy was going crazy on text, Elijah said. Scarlet raised an eyebrow. "She sent me one and it said congrats." "He's my brother only now," she said, making Elijah smirk. "Never considered you my sister from the start," he said. "Ouch," Angela said as the couple in front kissed. Sighing softly, she sat back. Liam looked over at her, thinking it must be pretty daunting for her. They all fell silent, listening to the music that was playing, and Scarlet rested her head back, ready to sleep since she hadn't in the morning, and Elijah answered a pack work call with his earpiece. Liam took the chance to mind link Angela. "You know, I know she wasn't what you were expecting, but did you not feel attracted to her? I did, I mean it's something I've never considered, so I just need time. How do you feel? That you didn't meet your mate? She asked through the link. Liam looked out the window at the passing cars, sighing. In a way I'm glad, I'm not ready to accept someone when I love someone else. I think it's for the best. So, when the time comes and I meet her, I can be the mate that my mate can be proud of, but now isn't that time. Angela didn't say anything, his words echoing in her mind. She did feel bad for him and she hoped one day she'd have the answer she was looking for, also hoping Liam had a mate who would love him unconditionally. They had dropped Liam and Angela off and now just got home. Elijah smirked before he reached over and kissed her in the entrance hall. The smell of fresh homemade chips and charcoal chicken wafted through the air, reminding them both of Jessica's amazing cooking. Let's get to this, he said mockingly. Elijah seriously, don't make things worse, Scarlet said quietly, just as Indigo came running out from the kitchen. Guys, she said, rushing at Elijah and giving him a big hug. Congratulations. Scarlet crossed her arms watching as Elijah spun her around, grinning. I got my girl, right? Indigo nodded, high-fiving him when he put her down. What was I? A prize to be won? Scarlet said, narrowing her eyes. The two smirked at her. A lot more than just a prize, sweetheart, he said, wrapping an arm around Scarlet's waist and pulled her close. Indigo wrinkled her nose as she watched them kiss. That's still gross, she mumbled. Elijah was about to speak when Jessica and Jackson stepped out of the kitchen. The tension between father and son was strong. It was Jessica who made the first move. Stepping forward, she hugged Scarlet tightly, proud to see her father's disgusting mark gone from her neck. I'm so happy you two are mates, she said softly but still loud enough that everyone in that hall could hear. Thanks, Mama, Scarlet said, happy to hear those words. Jessica stepped back and looked at Elijah, who now turned his gaze to her. She gave him a smile which he returned, accepting her embrace. I know you will take care of her, she said quietly. Obviously, he replied, now looking back at his dad. So Alpha Jackson, she turned out to be my mate. Her mark should be clear proof of that, want to make sure it's real. Jackson looked at his son, frowning deeply. Deep down he knew that he was the one in the wrong. The two of them were destined to be together, but to admit that wasn't easy. He clenched his jaw looking between them. I don't need anything to be proved, it seems you two are mates, he said. So, when will the two of you divorce? Elijah asked, raising his eyebrow, making Scarlet frown. No one is divorcing and no one is taking away anyone's position. Dad, please, you said you would try before you even knew we were mates, she said softly, remembering their conversation in the kitchen. I did, he said curtly. Elijah frowned. So shouldn't you at least admit you were wrong or apologize? He asked coldly. Jackson's eyes flashed. I'm still your father, boy. It's the only reason I'm holding my anger back. You threatened to strip me of my alpha position for your own ego, so now I want to know, since we're mates, what will you two do? Elijah, Jessica began, but Elijah raised a finger stopping her, his eyes not leaving his father. I wouldn't have had a problem whether we were mates or not. Maybe you should take out the stick that's shoved up you and accept you were in the wrong," he said coldly. Jackson frowned, clenching his jaw. "Fine. I may have been, but I will not apologize. We will hold the Alpha ceremony a month from now, once we have dealt with Zidane and his pack." He said nothing more, turning and heading upstairs. Elijah simply frowned coldly. He knew he wasn't going to get an apology from the man, but he wouldn't make it worse for the 3 females who were watching him. Different emotions in all their eyes. Jessica looked guilty and sad, Indigo looked worried, and Scarlet was frowning deeply. Elijah looked at Jessica. Despite everything, she had been supportive. It was high time he spoke to her one-to-one. "Can I have a word?" he asked, a small frown on his face. Jessica nodded, looking at her daughters. "You two can go in, get the drinks on the table in the meantime." The girls nodded, heading to the kitchen, and Elijah walked towards the lounge. Once inside, Jessica shut the door after her, looking at her stepson, who was now running a hand through his hair. "I won't drag this out. I've never seen you as a mother, although you were there for me growing up. No one can replace Mom." Jessica nodded, looking down at her hands. She had tried to win his love, but it seemed she hadn't been enough. His words were cold and emotionless. It would be a lie to say they did not hurt her. "It doesn't mean I don't think of you as family. I appreciated what you did for Dad. For me, heck, I got a little sister too. But growing up, Scarlet was someone I never could treat the same way as Indigo, and I think it was the reason I became angrier with everything. When she called Dad Dad, it irritated out of me. Maybe it was the bond or my feelings for her that I never realized, I don't know. I just want to say I don't regret the fact Dad married you, for him bringing you here. I know I come off like I don't care at times, but I just wanted to let you know that I do consider you family." He finished, shoving his hands into his pockets as he looked at his shoes. Jessica smiled gently, his words warming her, and any doubtful thoughts she had were gone. She brushed away her tears that she didn't even realize she had and stepped forward, cupping Elijah's face. "Hearing that means more than I can ever express. Thank you," she said softly, pulling him down, placing a kiss on his forehead. Elijah gave her a hug, thinking he was glad he had told her how he felt. Some relationships didn't need a title, and this was one of them. She would never replace his mother, but she was the closest thing he had to a mother figure, and he did love her even if he could never say it. "Well, we better get to the kitchen before my chicken gets burnt," she said, smiling. Elijah smirked. "Or it's all eaten, especially with the way those two eat," he said, making her chuckle as they both headed back to the kitchen just as Jackson was coming down the stairs with Scarlet. The 4 exchanged looks. The men simply looked away haughtily whilst the women smiled. Things were going back to normal, even if it was a little by little. It was the following day and Scarlet was on her way to Amelia's. They were leaving for the Black Storm Pack tomorrow morning, and she wanted to see the woman before she left. She was walking along, lost in thought, until she saw Fiona and Elijah having a heated argument up ahead. She stopped, frowning. Did the woman not get a hint? Elijah growled at her, making the girl break into sobs again. Scarlet shook her head. She was fed up with her constant tears. Walking over, she grabbed Fiona by her arm and wrenched her away from Elijah, her eyes a steely silver as she glared at her. "You know, I gave you a clear warning. Stay away from my man. Scarlet said, her voice cold, her alpha aura surrounding her making Fiona look at Elijah fearfully. He simply shook his head. I think I'll let your Luna deal with you, he said. Leaning over, he gripped Scarlet's chin, kissing her. I'll see you later, I'm heading to the pack house to organize our team. See you later, Scarlet said, all the time not letting go of Fiona's arm. She watched Elijah walk off before turning her gaze back to Fiona. I warned you, love him. It's not my fault, she sobbed. Scarlet frowned. He isn't yours. As your Luna, by going after the Alpha you are directly insulting me, she said, now letting go of the woman's arm. She slapped her hard across the face. Fiona gasped as her head snapped to the side sharply, pain throbbing through her. Scarlet grabbed her by her neck and lifted her up, trying to control her anger. Because I'm your Luna I won't do more. But I swear. Chase Elijah again and I will make sure you are thrown out of this pack. Do I make myself clear? Scarlet snapped. Fiona looked at her, whimpering as she felt blood trickle out of her nose. She had lost, even if her heart didn't want to believe it. There was nothing left to hope for, and she knew Scarlet would follow up on her threat. Elijah had said the same thing minutes earlier. Seeing the hatred in his eyes for her had hurt a lot. A foreign feeling bubbled in the pit of her stomach for the woman in front of her, but she seemingly looked away, casting her eyes to the floor. I promise, I won't try any more. It's clear there is no place in his heart for me. Yeah, there isn't, and this time I hope you remember that. Scarlet snapped icily. Fiona simply nodded, feeling defeated. Scarlet pushed past her, feeling annoyed. She had ruined her mood entirely. She reached Amelia's cottage, knocking on the slightly open door. The smell of tea brewing filled her nose when she heard Amelia speak. Come on in, you don't expect me to come and welcome you graciously because you're the Luna now. Scarlet smiled as she pushed the door open and stepped inside. No, I would never expect that of you, she said, amused. Looking around, she saw the table was already set with cherry Bakewell tarts, angel slices and coconut cake. All homemade and smelling divine. Good. Amelia snorted as she turned the pan off and poured it into 2 mugs. You baking for me is enough. Scarlet chipped in slyly, making Amelia frown at her whilst bringing the tea over. Oh, don't let it get to your head. I baked these for me. Now unless you want me to give you a good beating, sit down and tell me everything, she said, making Scarlet smile. Okay, if you say so, she said, picking up a tart and taking a bite. Goddess, these are magical. Why thank you. Now no dallying, I want all the details minus the nasty bits, Amelia said, happy to see the mark that now graced Scarlet's neck. Scarlet smiled as she began to tell Amelia the full events of the day of the blood moon. 3 minutes later, Amelia sat back smiling, happy to hear it all, including Jackson and Elijah had lunch together. Things were indeed looking up. Now lamb glad, I do think you're too good for that fool. But I think he is improving a little, she said, smiling as she placed her empty mug down. Scarlet nodded. He's improved a lot, I really do love him, she said, smiling softly. I'm sure you do, Amelia said, Her smile now faded as she looked at Scarlet seriously. You are leaving tomorrow? Yes, Scarlet said, the mood shifting drastically as the women fell silent. You were blessed by the moon goddess, given as a gift to our kind. Sadly, it was used against you in the evilest way and worse, at the hands of the man who was meant to be your father. I know it will be hard to face him, but I also know you are strong enough to do so. You are an alpha, Scarlet, and although that man deserves a painful death, don't do anything that will make you regret it later. Scarlet looked at her. Amelia had always been a wise woman, and although she wanted to tear her father to shreds or torture him the way he had her, she knew what she truly needed to do was find closure. She would be the one to end his life, but she would also remember what Amelia had said. She nodded. I'll understand, Grandma, she said quietly. Amelia smiled at her and gave a small nod. I'm glad, you are a blessing, child, and above all else I want you to know that. Scarlet let her words sink in. She didn't know why the goddess had blessed her as an alpha, but she would never take it for granted. Sure, she had often resented Selene, but she had also been the one to bless her with Elijah as her mate. She would be an alpha that would make her pack, her family, and above all her mate proud. Picking up a slice of coconut cake, she smiled contentedly. Something about such a simple conversation with Amelia put her at ease. Night had fallen and Scarlet was sitting on Angela's bed. Her friend had been a lot more silent over text and Scarlet wanted to spend a little time with her at least. Knowing she was going through a lot. Okay, so Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast? Angela said, holding up both DVDs of the live-action movies. Aladdin, Scarlet said, leaning against the headboard. She pulled the bag of trays she had picked up before coming here and took out the drinks. Aladdin it is, Angela said, putting the movie on before she came and dropped onto the bed next to Scarlet. The movie started and both girls dug into the snacks. I love the songs. My favorite is Prince Ali, Scarlet said. Oh yeah, you loved singing that one, Angela said, amused as she opened a packet of crisps, her eyes on the movie. Scarlet nodded. Yep, she said before she looked at Angela. Cassandra, what is she like? Angela's smile faded and she looked at the packet in her hand. Confident, beautiful, funny, and she's always known she was a lesbian. And is that what scares you? That you're inexperienced with women? Scarlet asked. Angela sighed. I don't know, maybe? Or it's just a shock when I've always dated men. I don't think that's a good enough reason, hun, Scarlet said, looking at her friend as she opened the bottle of Coca-Cola and took a sip. I know, Angela said, now dropping back and staring at the ceiling. I'm just scared that I'll accept her and then I'll realize later on I don't want her. I don't think that will happen, but why not go on a trip away together? Just the two of you, maybe Scotland? I don't think you putting distance between you two and thinking of all the what-ifs is wise, Scarlet said. Angela pouted, picking up a chocolate bar and threw it at Scarlet. You're annoying. Don't play Luna. Well, I am your Luna, so listen to me, Scarlet said, amused. She lay down next to Angela and looked at the ceiling, the movie long forgotten. Do you think she'll be okay with me, with all my doubts? My past with men and everything? Angela asked. Scarlet turned her head, looking at her friend. I'm sure she will. She knows this is all new to you and I'm sure she will respect and take it slow. I'm sure if you ever miss, she could use a strap on. Scarlet said smirking. Angela blushed, smacking Scarlet's arm. Hey, don't put an image of her like that in my head, she said, glaring at her friend. Scarlet raised an eyebrow. I only mentioned a strap-on, you're the one who's imagining things, she said, laughing as she sat up, grabbing her drink again. Angela smiled softly. I think you're right. If I don't give us this, a chance I won't ever know, she said. Scarlet nodded. Exactly, and come on, we both can appreciate Cassandra is one woman, she teased. Angela pouted. Don't check my mate out, she said, picking up one of her cushions and smacking Scarlet with it. Well, you checked mine out, she shot back. Both girls laughed and teased until the movie finished and Elijah came to collect Scarlet. Something both girls taunted him about until he admitted that he was missing her like crazy. After all, she didn't really need anyone to escort her home. The next morning rain was pouring down as the 50 men from Elijah's pack accompanied them, ready to face off against Zidane's pack. Jessica had wanted to come but Jackson and Scarlet had been fully against it. Scarlet was in the back of the car with Elijah and Marcus, a pack warrior. Liam was driving and Aaron was in the passenger seat. We should get to the Black Storm pack in another hour and a half, Marcus said. Oh, and the other packs are on their way, 2 have already reached there, Aaron said, tapping his knee as he looked ahead. How many men are we in total? Liam asked, his face serious, now in full warrior mode. He was after all the best fighter after Elijah. He knew the rough number, but Alpha Daniel had chickened out at the last moment. We're looking at near enough 600 wolves, Elijah said. That's a good amount considering how many of his men he kills off. We will still be enough to handle him and his pack, Aaron said, referring to Zidane. As beta he was the strategic one. Scarlet didn't add to the conversation, her mind flitting off to the things she had learned about Zidane. For many years his pack had plenty of rogue attacks, but soon his ways of ruthlessly torturing any trespassers became well known and even the rogues backed off. She remembered Amelia saying her being a part of the Blood Moon pack was a blessing and kept rogues away. She wondered how true it was. Knowing she was getting closer and closer to facing him made her not believe in herself much, but she refused to back away or get scared. Elijah's arm tightened around her, sensing her turmoil. She had always been brave, but every night he now shared the nightmares that plagued her dreams. It was hard and painful experience, but what hurt the most was she had suffered it all and kept it all inside. After that first night, he tried to keep calm, not wanting to disturb her. Having noticed how she would try to keep herself awake so he didn't get disturbed with her nightmares. He hoped in time those memories would ease up. He kissed her softly. Everything is going to be all right, He was cut off when something slammed against their car with such force it was thrown off the road, seeing the large car that had hit them flip over and burst into flames. Pain seared through her back, the smell of gas, fire, and blood filled the air. The strong sense of déjà vu overcame Scarlet, remembering the first time Kate had come for her, her heart thumping loudly when she caught the scent of several werewolves that she didn't recognize. We need to get out, Liam shouted as he punched through the roof, shifting and ripping the side of the car off. No one needed a second warning. Elijah scooped Scarlet up, lifting her out of the car before placing her down and turning to face the 12 large masked werewolves that were now facing them. Before any of Scarlet's group could even attack, they threw something on the ground and Scarlet stumbled back as the strong smell of wolfsbane gas filled her senses. "Fall back!" Elijah shouted through the link. "Scarlet! I'm okay, I am." She was cut off when she felt something stab into her side and her vision went black. "Scarlet!" Elijah called, trying to sniff her out with the strong wolfsbane that was tearing at their insides. He ran forward, sensing Scarlet's scent moving away, shifting as he leapt from the smoke and tore out the heart of one of the wolves. Scanning the area, he saw Scarlet being thrown in a car before it zoomed off. Fear and panic filled him like the gas that surrounded them. He couldn't lose her. "No!" He shouted, about to run after it when 3 wolves blocked his way. Anger blazed through him. No one was taking his woman from him. He attacked them in blind rage, tearing 2 to pieces before he stopped as he gripped the throat of the 3rd. They needed one alive. He looked around, seeing the other 3 finishing off the werewolves that were left behind. None of the 3 had been able to shift thanks to the gas, and even Elijah could feel the effect it was having on him. Aaron held one and looked at Elijah. "Alpha, do we need someone to talk?" "One is enough," Elijah replied through the link before he ripped the werewolf's head from its body. He looked towards the distance. The car was long gone. They needed to regroup, track and head to Zidane's pack immediately. Shifting back, he walked over to Aaron. "I need a phone. Tell the packs what's happened and tell them to step on it. I will contact Raphael," he commanded, taking Aaron's phone from him. His heart raced wildly. Despite the calmness of his tone, his heart and mind were a tornado of emotions. Scarlet had been taken. If anything happened to her. He took a deep breath. He would not let fear engulf him. This time he would save her. They didn't head to Raphael's pack, instead making their way straight for Zidane's pack. Aaron had been left with the wolf to get any answers on where exactly they were taking Scarlet. The fact they had been ambushed meant that Zidane knew they were coming. But how? And how did they know what car Scarlet would be in? Questions that had no answers, but Elijah vowed to himself that he would find out exactly what happened. There was no chance it could have been from Candace, because that wouldn't have told them what car they were in, and if there was someone within Elijah's own pack that betrayed him, then they would pay dearly. They reached Zidane's pack in record time, and although he had driven dangerously fast once they were picked up, it had still been a few hours since he had last seen Scarlet. More than half the allied wolves were with them, with a quarter going around the back to close in on them, and a smaller number consisting of the best tracker wolves had tried to follow if any tracks or scent was left behind, although the chances were very slim. They parked at the edge of Zidane's territory of thick trees. There was no choice but to go by foot. "We're right behind you," Raphael said, as his brother stepped out from behind him, scanning the trees. "Thanks. Although I don't think he should be here. We need to shift," Elijah said. "They would be a lot faster in wolf's form." Alejandro glanced at him, his lip curling slightly. "I can keep up," he said. Raphael looked at his brother, then at Elijah, and simply nodded. Elijah said nothing. He didn't want to put both brothers at risk with them being the only heirs to their pack, but he knew how stubborn Raphael was, and Alejandro was at a whole other level. "Well then, let's go," Liam said. He too was in a mess of nerves, thinking how he hadn't been able to protect her. He should have protected her. They shifted and began running towards Zidane's pack. Elijah's eyes widened in shock as he saw Alejandro running ahead at a speed that was inhuman even for a werewolf. He felt a chill go down his spine. There was something off about the boy. No human or wolf could run that fast. Elijah sped up trying to outrun the boy. He inched faster but the boy still kept pace with him until both were running side by side. What happened, Alpha? Did your pride just take a hit? Alejandro mocked as he jumped over tree roots. Elijah couldn't reply in wolf form but he wanted to ask the boy exactly what he was because he was not an ordinary werewolf teen, he didn't even have his wolf yet. He didn't ponder over it for long, his mind once again rushing back to Scarlet. Was she safe? He pushed the fear down as he focused on getting to the heart of the Desert Storm pack. The trees began to thin out and members of Zidane's pack were stationed around. It was clear they were expecting them. Elijah stepped forward. The plan was for Scarlet to be here. It was now probably common knowledge that Zidane had her. Would that mean those sighting them would change their mind? He wasn't sure but he needed to try. Stepping forward, he shifted into a man. Raphael and Liam stepped closer on each side of him, still in wolf form. I Alpha Elijah Westwood of the Blood Moon Pack and the mate to your future Alpha Scarlet. I am asking you to stand down. Zidane's ruthless reign ends now. Step down. Accept Scarlet as your new Alpha and we will avoid a lot of bloodshed. He said, letting his Alpha aura surround him. Two of the men smirked coldly. Do you think we didn't know of your plan to come? Not everyone who pretended to side the old Luna was actually on her side. One of them spoke. Elijah frowned. Old Luna. His eyes widened in shock. Was Candace Zidane's mother? Then you've signed your life away. Elijah said. He didn't need to give a signal for his allied wolves to lung forward. Elijah himself shifted mid-air before tearing out the heart of the first man, setting the pace for a full-on bloodbath. All around wolf fought wolf, even the cloudy skies seemed to mirror the mood of those fighting below. In the sea of wolves only Alejandro stood in human form, easily fending the wolves off and cutting them down. He saw Elijah break through the ranks. He was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Bored of the wolves around him, he ran after him. Using his two long daggers to decapitate a few wolves on the way. Elijah reached the middle of the pack living areas. Everything was dead silent. Too silent. He sniffed the air but there was not even a hint of Scarlet around. The smell of blood and wolfsbane clung to the air. He rushed to the pack house, shifting back as he pushed open the door. His eye widened when he saw children, adults, and elderly lying around, each one supporting bruises and injuries. There were some trying to care for those who were heavily injured. What happened here? Elijah said quietly. One of the men looked up, his eyes lighting up when he saw the two men at the door. Alpha Zidane, someone ratted us out and he took it out on us. He said, his eyes looking haunted. He killed a lot of us. That? Elijah growled. It was obvious if compelled they wouldn't have been able to disobey their Alpha's command. A few more of his team had appeared and Elijah ran his hand through his hair. Check the entire place, the cells, the mansion, everywhere for Scarlet. I want another squad to help the injured. He commanded, pointing to certain wolves, motioning them what to do. Someone tossed him a pair of pants and he pulled them on. Alejandro wandered off, and one thing Elijah realized was the boy listened to no one. He walked to Liam and a few other warriors, taking a phone from one of his men and called Aaron. "Has he spoken?" he asked, trying not to sound as desperate and worried as he felt. He was the alpha and he needed to stay strong for his people. He just said the cavern and then he ripped his own tongue out. Aaron growled. Elijah closed his eyes. It had already been a while since Scarlet was taken, each minute was killing him. "That's all he said, cavern." Elijah said, thinking it felt like they were grasping at straws. "I know where that is." A weak yet recognizable voice came from behind them. Elijah turned and saw Candace standing there, barely able to support herself. The injuries on her body were shocking. It seemed those in the morbid packhouse hall were the lightest injured. "You need to see a doctor," Elijah said, seeing the blood the woman was losing. "He killed them all," she whispered. "You don't have time, the cavern is 20 miles from here, not far from the River Kent. I can mark it for you on a map." The man holding her made her sit on the ground as he shouted at someone to bring a map. Elijah opened a map on the phone in his hand and crouched down, holding it out to her. Her shaking hands reached for it. Elijah zoomed in around River Kent and Candace began to move the map as she looked for the location. "He's your son," Elijah said. The woman didn't even falter at the statement, simply sighing. "Yes, a shame, isn't it? I gave birth to a monster, nothing to be proud of." Her voice was clipped despite how weak she looked and sounded. "It doesn't define you, you're Scarlet's grandmother and I'm sure she will be happy to know she has you," Elijah said quietly. Candace looked up, giving him a weak smile before she motioned to the phone. "It's around there, you won't miss it." They would have had to travel by foot at the end. "Thank you," Elijah said, standing up. "I want those with any knowledge in first aid to stay behind." Candace and the man supporting her looked up at him, surprised. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "This pack belongs to Scarlet and I will take care of what is hers," he said softly, his heart clenching painfully at the fact she wasn't here. "Thank you, Alpha Elijah, please save our Alpha too," the young man next to Candace said. Elijah nodded. "Harrison knows where the cavern is once you get there, although he isn't a state to walk. Perhaps if someone can carry him," Candace suggested, looking weakly over her shoulder as she motioned to a teen boy. "We can do that," Elijah said, motioning to Liam to get the boy before walking off. They had no time to waste. Scarlet groaned, her entire body was screaming in agony. Her insides were burning, and she could feel the wolf's bane being injected in her even now. Her arms were tied painfully behind her back. It seemed they knew not to take chances. A sharp kick to her stomach made her flinch, making her open her eyes slightly. She looked around. They were in some sort of cave and she almost smiled in irony. Why was she always brought to caves? She was beginning to hate them. She could tell from the light that came in from outside that it was probably late in the afternoon. She could see a few wolves standing around the edge of the large cavern. "Tch!" hissed a voice she recognized instantly. She spat back, now glaring at the man who was stood above her. His platinum hair was no longer sleeked back, in fact, it looked like he was stressed out. She was glad he was, his suit looked rumpled too. She wondered why he was so stressed but did not have time to ponder over it when he grabbed her by her hair and lifted her from the ground, slamming her against the wall. She clenched her teeth, not giving him the satisfaction of knowing that he was hurting her. "Keep going, end it. Kill me if you can," she taunted, glaring at the man she resented with every inch of her being. "Oh, I will," Zidane said, glaring at her. He had thought she would succumb to the mark, and when he came for her he would destroy her, but then there was an influx of attacks and trouble from within. He had to regain control. He hadn't thought the blood moon would change things, but it had. She had found her mate, and any control or plan he had was ruined. Then she had the cheek to try to overtake his pack. He slammed her head against the wall angrily, and Scarlet gasped. Her hands were bound by silver chains, and although they burned her skin, she knew if she had the strength she could break free. "I was meant to be in control. You were made for me to use. You will be my obedient dog, or I will kill you," he shouted, repeatedly smashing her head against the wall and making her vision spin, hissing when he emptied another syringe of wolfsbane into her. "It wouldn't have worked. You can never control me, you never were able." The reason, she trailed off, trying to clear her darkening vision. "The reason I irritate you so much is because you were never able to break me. I'm a alpha." She smirked as a fit of cold blazing anger surged from the mad alpha, and he dropped her, kicking her across the head. "Don't ever give yourself that much importance," he shrieked, his eyes flashing dangerously, his wolf making its presence known. "I will break you. Then go ahead, all you can do is attack when I'm down. If you're such a strong alpha, fight me. One-on-one," she shouted, seeing one of the wolves step forward, a syringe in hand. She growled, making him hesitate, feeling her aura around her. "Give it to her," growled Zidane, and the man made to inject her. Scarlet spun around, pulling her chains and letting them whip the man across the face. The man growled. Scarlet's eyes flashed dangerously, her alpha aura now surrounding her despite how weak she was feeling. "You will regret this," she said quietly. The dangerous tone to her voice made him hesitate, but Zidane stepped forward, grabbing the dropped syringe and injected it into her neck. "I'm not alone. Not anymore," she mumbled as he hit her across the head, making her fall to the ground. Her vision blurring, thinking this wasn't meant to happen. She was meant to be stronger than this. She needed to shift. If she could, she would be able to defeat him. She closed her eyes. His beating continued as he kicked every inch of her body, wanting her to scream out, to hear her pain. She worked on her heart rate. She needed him to think she was out cold. One thing she knew about Zidane: he hated rushing to the kill, preferring to play first. "Focus on something that calms you," she told herself, taking a deep breath as Elijah's face flitted into her mind. Focusing on him, she honed out the pain her body was facing. Remembering his scent, the way he held her, looked at her with so much love and the promise to always be there for her. She felt a sharp pain in her chest. She needed him, and this time she couldn't free herself. She had been tricked and resorted to such a weak state. Elijah, it was the last thing she thought before a searing pain rushed down her back, realizing Zidane had moved on to using weapons for his abuse. "I'm coming, kitten, hold on," Elijah's distant voice came. She smiled weakly. Had she imagined his voice? Probably, but she didn't mind. if this was it, then she was glad. The last thing she thought she heard was her love's words. Hold on, it was the last thing she heard as a knife was stabbed into her back repeatedly before she lost consciousness. Elijah ran through the forest, the passing trees were a blur. Raphael, Liam, and Alejandro were alongside him with many wolves following behind. With each passing second his worry for her grew. He couldn't feel anything through the bond, but he also knew she was alive. It was the only thing that was keeping him sane. Still, knowing her father was a psychotic maniac didn't help. They saw some wolves ahead and knew they were on the right track. It also meant Zidane knew they were here. Nothing was said as the plan was already put in place. The wolves at the front burst through their ranks. Before Zidane's wolves could follow, the rest lunged at them. Elijah growled, feeling a loss of his own pack. It only pushed him further, slowing down when he saw the three women he hated so much. The wolf-less women, it seemed even the third had survived. Alejandro stepped forward, spinning his weapons in his hand. "Lil, handle them," he said, his quiet rugged voice cold as ever. Raphael looked at him and Elijah knew they were mind-linking. He saw Alejandro frown before giving a curt nod. Raphael nodded as if satisfied and motioned for Elijah to carry on. The moment they rushed forward, the women jumped forward, each holding a weapon. Alejandro threw his first weapon at one, who jumped aside to avoid it. In a flash he grabbed the second by her neck. Elijah tossed the third aside as he ran past her, but before she could lunge at his back, a dangerous menacing growl that held complete power made her stop. In fact, every wolf there slowed down, all including Elijah. Turning to the young boy, not missing his blood-red eyes. "Go," Alejandro said. Something about his voice was almost a command and he didn't question it, turning and rushed ahead. Liam still carried Harrison on his back. The boy looked rather shocked at what had happened, even holding fear in his eyes at the sight of Alejandro's red eyes. That was not a color a wolf ever had for eyes, but what confused him more was the boy looked younger than 18. "It's straight ahead, there," he said. "Leave him here with two wolves," Elijah said through the mind link before running ahead. "I'm coming, kitten, hold on," he thought through the link, hoping she could hear him. He could feel she was near, picking up hints of her scent although they were mixed with so many others. Hold on. Minutes later the entrance to the cavern was easy to spot. A line of wolves stood there and he noticed that all of them were bulky and well-trained. Cade stepped forward. "You should really stop butting into other people's business," he said coldly. Elijah didn't care. He wasn't someone who was going to see reason and he had no time to waste. He growled threateningly, a clear indication as all of them rushed forward. Zidane's men shifted as they clawed and ripped at each other. "Elijah, go," Liam said through the link, knocking Cade aside. Raphael was fighting three other wolves. Elijah took the chance and entered the cavern. It was a lot larger than he had expected. The smell of blood and wolfsbane filled his nose, stronger than the intoxicating scent of his mate. His mate that now lay in a pool of blood. Just seeing her in that state dug painfully at his heart. Zidane stood over her, a weapon raised to attack her once again. Elijah growled in rage, jumping across the cavern and knocked Zidane back. The man shifted into a huge wolf before he even hit the floor. He was black and white and the evil look on his face matched the darkness of the man himself. Saliva dripped from his mouth and his manic eyes were burning with pure evil. He snarled at Elijah. Elijah growled back, anger burning within him, wanting to burn him for everything he had done to Scarlet. Keeping his eyes on Zidane, he licked Scarlet's face, relieved she was still breathing. He yanked her chains off her, not caring how it burned his paws, and flung them aside. The clang of the metal hitting the ground was drowned out by Zidane's roar of rage as he lunged at Elijah. Elijah lowered himself and threw himself straight at the lunging wolf. In size he was bigger than Zidane, but the man was indeed strong. Their wolves fought and ripped at each other. Elijah didn't feel any of the pain, anger, and adrenaline fueling him. The nightmares haunting Scarlet filled his mind. This man had ruined her childhood and he would make sure he paid for that. Scarlet opened her eyes. The pain was lessening. Had he stopped? She knew she wasn't dead, for the pain was still present. Her heart hammering when she smelt a familiar scent. Elijah. She looked around, hearing the growls and howls of wolves at war. Some were close and echoed around the empty walls. She recognized both, seeing Elijah fighting against Zidane, who looked even bloodier. Elijah had him currently pinned to the ground, as he bit into his side. Scarlet got up. Her top was completely torn from all the brutal attacks with the knife to her back, holding on by the shoulders slightly. Her chains were gone, and although she felt weak, she could stand. It would take a short while for her to regain her strength, and she couldn't wait. She was going to deal with Zidane too. She saw Zidane look at her, his eyes lighting manically. Throwing Elijah off him, he was about to jump for Scarlet but was stopped when Elijah threw him to the ground once again. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Sorry I was late," he said through the link. She shook her head, not wanting to distract him, yet at the same time she wanted to tell him. "You came and that's all that matters," she replied softly. He glanced at her, his eyes softening despite the blood that was dripping from his jaw. Just then the sound of a howl of pain echoed from near the entrance to the cavern, and Scarlet moved closer to the wall. "Stay clear of the fight." Elijah mind-linked, his voice strained as he and Zidane came dangerously close to her, and Zidane tried to lash out at her but was dragged back by Elijah. She nodded, keeping to the side as she moved away from the fight. It was then several wolves came rushing in. One of them lunged at her until Liam in wolf form knocked him aside. She recognized the attacker as Cade. He was bigger than Liam's wolf, but even then Liam was impressively strong, putting up a good fight with the beta. Liam ripped through his side, throwing him to the ground. Turning, he looked her over, his eyes filled with relief seeing she was okay. She was about to smile when she saw Cade silently getting up. Her eyes widened in horror as she watched it happen, as if in slow motion. He lunged forward, but his aim wasn't Liam, he was coming right for her. She knew from the glint in his eyes, he was aiming for the kill. Elijah too saw the move, but he was too far and trapped in a fight with Zidane. Fear consumed him as he shouted out, watching as Scarlet raised her arms in reflex, just as Liam rushed forward to protect her. "Watch out!" she shouted, but it was too late. The moment when they had both been distracted had cost them. Scarlet felt the pain in her chest as she watched Cade's claws rip through Liam as his large form shielded her. His eyes widened in shock as his warm blood dripped onto Scarlet. Raphael rushed towards them, throwing Cade off Liam before he could fully rip his heart out. Liam collapsed forward, shifting back into his human self. Scarlet caught him, cradling his body before placing his head on the ground. She cried out in panic. His chest was a gaping mess, a wound that even a werewolf would not recover from. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pressed her hands to a wound that was too large. She heard Elijah's angry growl, but she had no time to look. "No, no. It's okay," Liam said, coughing, pain contorting his face although he tried to smile. "Why did you do that? I can heal better than you," she shouted, watching his blood mar her hands. She looked around before pulling off the torn shirt she was wearing that was falling to pieces, pressing it against his wound, but it was futile. He was losing too much blood. "If dying meant I saw you strip for me, I would have done it sooner," he said, cheekily winking at her, trying to smile despite the pain that rocked his body. Scarlet shook her head, not able to play along, trying to fight the tears that were welling in her eyes. "Don't say that. You can't die, Liam." "No," she whispered, her hands shaking. Her heart was thumping loudly in her chest and she felt sick. She wished she had the ability to heal. Why wasn't that the gift she had? "Don't waste your tears on me, Scarlet. I'm not worthy of them," he said softly. His face was draining of color, and with it, Scarlet knew his life was creeping away. "Don't say that, please, Liam. Don't let go," she whispered, looking around for help, for anything that could help him. Even if she knew it was futile. He tried to smile, raising a trembling hand. He brushed her tears off her cheek, cupping her face. "LOL, wish I didn't have to. But it's okay if I had to die, I'm glad it was saving you." His soft words tore painful at her chest, not even realizing when she let out a loud sob. "No, no, Liam, you have things to do. Dreams to accomplish. A mate to find." She broke off, crying for the friend she didn't even get to know properly, a man who had always wished her well from the sidelines. Now remembering the small things he always did for her, things she had taken advantage of and had never realized. From passing her a water bottle after training, or giving her a shaded spot, complimenting her when she looked good, or asking if she was okay when she was quiet. His blood coated her hands, but what would always remain in her mind was the fact he was trying to hide his pain from her. "The only dream I had was you," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Their eyes met, soft brown against sage green. The sounds of the fighting around them drowned out, and Scarlet felt her heart break as she shook her head. She couldn't form any words, seeing the strong love in his eyes for her. Instead, she leant down, pressing her lips softly against his. She felt his gasp of surprise against her lips before he kissed her back ever so tenderly. Tears still streamed down her cheeks. She didn't move back, not until his hand that cupped her cheek dropped to the ground and his lips became still. Liam was gone. Scarlet sat there, her body suddenly feeling numb. Elijah had seen her kiss him, heard his dying words, but despite the searing jealousy that had come from his wolf, the pain he felt for his dying friend outweighed it. He had seen Liam die as it had felt like a part of him had died with him. Rage and hatred towards the alpha he fought and his dogs overcame him as he lashed out at the wolves who had joined Zidane. Scarlet stood up, watching Raphael slam Cade to the ground. He was nearly dead. She watched as he shifted to human form. Raphael made to tear his head from his body, but Scarlet stepped forward. "Allow me," she said, not caring she was drenched in blood, her own and Liam's. Even then she was healed, but the few bodies that lay around her were a stark reminder of men who would never return to their families. Men she knew and some who were the enemy. Cade looked up at her, fear in his eyes as he looked at the burning anger in Scarlet's steely silver eyes. "He has my mate," he whispered as if it would right the wrongs he had just committed. Scarlet shook her head. "You could have taken it slow, eased up on your attacks, but you didn't care," she said quietly. She saw the flicker of his eyes as he looked for an escape and she knew she was right. Cade really didn't care. She reached for him, her nails elongated before she plunged her hand into his chest as he screamed in agony and ripped his heart from him. It pulsed in her hand before she tossed it aside, not even sparing the body a look. Raphael, who was in wolf form, engaged with another wolf as Scarlet lunged at another one, clawing the wolf's neck before she snapped its head, with her hands doing the damage that she knew they couldn't heal from. Zidane was now limping, despite 3 wolves fighting Elijah with several dead around them. Scarlet growled menacingly. "Back down!" she hissed. It only made them hesitate at her alpha command. She was after all their next alpha and her command was second only to Zidane's. However, the moment of hesitation was enough. Before they could continue, Elijah took the chance to tear them both apart. Zidane growled, lunging at her, but Elijah bit into his neck, tearing him back and throwing him to the ground. Scarlet didn't waste time. Jumping forward, she sunk her claws into his neck, ripping it open. She wasn't done, but she would make sure he stayed down. She stepped back, watching Zidane shift back. The anger that was growing in her chest was fueled by the loss of all the wolves who had lost their lives. He gave her a cold, venomous look. Elijah stood by her side, making sure no one touched her. "You won't make it out of here alive," Zidane hissed, his eyes scanning the entrance of the cavern. She didn't miss the slight frown on his face, realizing no more wolves were coming. "We came prepared. Your rage, resentment, and greed for power caused the loss of so many lives today. You hated me, wanted to hurt me. What did you think? That this time I didn't have anyone? Remember, you were only able to hurt me because I was a helpless child. Now I have a pack and a mate who loves me unconditionally," Scarlet said, resting her hand on Elijah's golden fur that was matted with blood. She watched Zidane's anger growing as he clutched at his neck, knowing he wasn't healing. "You don't deserve happiness. The witch told me you would try to take my pack from me," he hissed manically. Scarlet raised an eyebrow as he continued. "Your mother took you away from me. You were meant to be mine. To rule and to control. That woman told me about your ability. I bet your mother knew." He spat. Standing up, he lunged at them. Scarlet knocked him aside before walking over to him. Elijah followed, keeping his distance, knowing this was her fight. "I was not yours to control or to abuse. You enjoyed torturing me when you should have been proud of the children you had," Scarlet shouted, her voice shaking. "Don't you ever try to blame Mama. Her only mistake was not trying to help the pack. A pack you have abused for far too long, but I will make up for that now." Zidane chuckled coldly. "You can never kill me, you don't have it in you. By killing me it shows you are no different than I am." He darted towards her, but she was ready. Her eyes flashed as she caught him by his throat. His hand about to plunge into her chest, but she knocked them aside with her free hand. She slammed him to the ground, kicking him hard and hearing the crunch of bones. I am nothing like you, or I would torture you slowly. I'm better than you, and I don't want to waste a minute more than I need to with you. She crouched down, grabbing him by his hair just as he had done to her countless times. May Selene send you to the pits of hell, she said coldly, glaring into green eyes that matched her in color yet could not have been more different. With those final words, she plunged her hand into his chest. Squeezing his heart, he hissed in agony, his eyes flickering between his own and his wolf's. He spat, gripping her wrist, but for the first time in their lives, the tables had turned. The child was now the alpha. Scarlet simply gave a cold smirk. How does it feel, being on the receiving side? She asked softly, twisting her hand in his chest. He hissed in pain, but there was not an ounce of remorse on his face. May you never rest in peace. With those words she ripped her hand out of his chest, his heart along with it, instantly dropping it. Zidane fell to the ground dead and Scarlet turned away. He didn't deserve even an inch of mercy. She felt a surge of power within her, feeling the pack link snap into place. By default she was now alpha of the pack. A menacing growl left her lips. Stand down. I am your new alpha, she said through the mind link. She sensed the confusion, the fear, and the relief of different wolves. Some congratulated her, others asked about Zidane, and others were glad it was over. They will stand down. Tell your men to apprehend those who were fighting, Scarlet said to Raphael and Elijah. Both did as she said. Elijah shifted back, pulling Scarlet into his arms tightly as Raphael looked at the wolf who was now cowering in fear. He clearly had not anticipated Zidane losing. Scarlet wrapped her arms around Elijah's waist, the spark of the bond sizzling through her. The comfort she felt eased the pain in her heart slightly. Liam, she said quietly. She knew he probably saw the kiss, but she didn't regret it. I know, kitten. I'm hurting too, he whispered. Liam, the backbone of their trio, him, Liam and Aaron. Liam was the peacemaker, the one with the heart of gold. He letting her cry silently into his chest. Liam had died for Scarlet, and that was something he would never be able to repay him for. He only hoped wherever he was happy. He kissed the top of Scarlet's head, inhaling her scent. It's over. It's over, he whispered. They had lost many. He knew his father was feeling every loss as alpha, and he wondered how high that number was. He looked over at Raphael, whose eyes were shadowed. He too had lost many. Let's get out of here, Elijah said. I'll get someone to collect our men. Liam, she said, tugging free. Elijah moved away from her, lifting the body of his friend. He had had his life in front of him and it had been taken so easily. What do you want done with Zidane and his men? Raphael asked. Toss them in the cavern and burn them, Scarlet said coldly, not an ounce of remorse within her. They had made their bed of choice, so they could now lay in it. The four left the cavern together, Raphael dragging the last survivor of Zidane's men from the cavern along with them. They didn't stop until they reached a horrifying scene, making them freeze. Blood and torn bodies covered the floor for meters around. Scarlet's heart hammered as she saw even wolf limbs lying around. Whatever had killed them had been so fast that they hadn't even been able to shift back to human form. Frozen in their tracks, they looked at the brutal horror scene before them. Scarlet felt her stomach churn at the sight. All eyes now went to the young man who leaned against a tree casually. The only thing on his tattooed body were the few chains that hung around his neck. Taking a drag from a cigarette. Alejandro, Raphael said, his face paling as he looked at the carnage before him. It was obvious to Scarlet and Elijah that Alejandro was probably behind it, but was it possible for one young boy to do this? Looking around, it was obvious there were near 100 bodies. "Brother," Alejandro said, blowing out a puff of smoke as he looked up at the sky that peeped out from the trees. "Why are you without your cloths?" Elijah asked sharply. The boy was only 15 after all, he didn't have a wolf, right? Raphael visibly tensed, something that didn't go unmissed by Elijah. Alejandro simply smirked humorlessly. "Oh? Well, since everyone was stripping and showing what they're packing, I thought I'd join the party, and it seems although I still have a few years to grow, I'm already winning in that department." He taunted shamelessly, glancing at his brother and Elijah. The two elder men simply frowned at him. Scarlet frowned, daring not to look down past his chest as she growled at him for insulting Elijah, who was definitely huge. She knew that for a fact and took offense. Elijah glanced at her. If the situation wasn't so dire, he would have found it amusing. "Easy there, stating facts," Alejandro said mockingly, just as a few men from Elijah and Raphael's packs showed up. Scanning the scene before their eyes went to Elijah and the body in his arms. A few from the Blood Moon pack recognized their trainer and lead warrior. Their faces fell as they slowly walked over, passing the men pants before they took Liam's body from Elijah. "Get this place cleared up," Raphael growled at Alejandro, who simply raised an eyebrow. "I did my part, do the rest," he said coldly, his eyes flashing that burning red. Elijah had seen earlier. It lasted for less than a second before he turned and walked off. Elijah looked at Raphael. "I won't ask what you're hiding, I owe you a lot as it is." Raphael gave him a grateful smile. "You owe me nothing and thank you," he said quietly. They placed a hand on each other's shoulders. Both had done so much for the other, and it was not something either would ever forget. "Thank you for everything. You lost your men because of me." "Thank you," Elijah said as Raphael smiled sadly. "I'm just glad your Luna is safe. I'm happy that you two turned out to be mates," he said quietly. Scarlet smiled gently. "Thank you, Alpha Raphael," she said. "Anytime, Luna, or should I say Alpha Scarlet," he said, smirking, slightly lifting the mood a little as Elijah pulled Scarlet into his arms. It was finally over. They had truly won. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.